All right, welcome again live on the marketplace floor of Forrester B2B Summit. My name is Matt Hines. We're excited to have you back for another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. We are excited to be here and interviewing a wide variety of people. We've had CMOs, we've had ROI award winners, and very excited to have with us now Principal Analyst at Forrester, John Arnold, join us to talk about what he's going to be presenting in the no pressure of a closing keynote of this conference. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so your topic is going to be around integrating, like just a small, easy tactical topic, right? Just integrating sales, marketing, product into sort of a single cohesive growth strategy.
Yeah, strategy is an interesting topic. I found in my research that B2B growth teams are starving for strategy, actually. So everybody needs to improve their operational processes. We all know that, and a lot of B2B organizations are working on that. But what they don't know is that they need to improve their growth strategies.
And even those that have done that to date often are doing that in silos. You got a marketing strategy, you got a sales strategy, there's a product strategy. They might share them with each other.
Yeah.
But sharing is not integrating.
Yeah, or there's no strategy.
Or there's no strategy.
That's another option.
Right.
Or there's a strategy at the top and not one at the frontline level. So that's another thing that there's a big gap. So the company has a growth strategy, but it hasn't translated down. And there's this sort of mentality of, the strategy falls on the front line and then the front line executes. And that's a very old school way to think about it. So the front line actually has more access to data and tools and technologies and close proximity to the customer than ever before. And there's not this like separation of thinkers and doers anymore. So the thinkers and the doers are on the front line, and they have sometimes a strategy that's counter to your strategy because the strategy is not working. And so they're going to, have to hit their goals.
Well, and for better or worse, if we pulled 10 people who are walking by us here on the show floor and asked them to define strategy, we'd probably get 10 different definitions of what strategy is. When you're thinking about this and advising Forrester clients, like what do you tell people strategy is?
So strategy I can tell you about it in terms of its function.
Yeah.
So a strategy helps you to achieve goals, or it creates advantages when there are limited resources that exist to do so. Mm-hmm. So if you have plenty of resources, right, you don't really need a strategy. You can just spend the money and get the result. But when you're limited and, hello marketers, are you spread too thin right now? Of course you are. But you need a strategy to create growth opportunities when your resources are limited. So that's what a strategy does. Mm-hmm. What a strategy is, there's not really one definition. Strategy can be strategy as position, strategy as a process, strategy as a decision or a direction, so there's lots of different definitions of it. But it's basically, one popular definition that George Colony, our CEO, likes to use is strategy is what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. So like, how are you going to achieve your goal with the limited resources that you have? And what are you not going to do and why?
That is one of the hardest things, I think, for people to do. I mean, I agree with your CEO. Strategy is choosing. And so by choosing, you inherently are saying, I'm going to do some things and not do others. And I think unless you have confidence in your strategy, that can feel limiting.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, that's a culture change. That's just not a strategy on paper change. You have to change how people think and operate in the business. How do you do that?
Yeah, and that's one of the topics for the keynote today is, how are you going to roll out your strategy and what are the different components of a strategy? And the way we're talking about it is adaptive strategy, because we're entering this new era of adaptive growth where buyers are changing, technologies are changing, B2B is changing. And all of those changes means that your strategy needs to be adaptive. It needs to be able to be flexible and change too. And you're totally right about the culture. In fact, what my research found was that your culture and your approach to strategy governance have to work together. So, cultures can be top down or bottom up, and strategies have to be governed with behaviors like micromanagement, where the managers are involved in all the details, or self-governance, where people have a lot of latitude. And those dynamics can really make or break your strategy, especially again at that frontline level where your frontline marketing team, your frontline sales team, they're responsible for the number and they have to hit that number. And if they're not hitting their number and the strategy is not working, they're going to kind of act independently and create their own strategy. Everyone has a strategy, whether they know it or not, or whether it's good or not. The idea is to get a hold of that and start to make it work together.
Years ago, I worked at a large software company based in Redmond. I won't name who they are. And we would spend months building a strategy, presenting it, putting it in binders. And then we would present it and everyone would say, yep, that's it. And we'd put it in a drawer.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't revisit it. And that's wrong for two reasons. A, we didn't make adjustments. And B, if it's in a drawer, you're not really watching to make sure that your actions are following the strategy, let alone making adjustments along the way. Do you still see that in the market today?
Yeah. I mean, Charles Kepner and Benjamin Trago were management consultants in the 60s. They advocated for flexible planning because they noted that executives would often present their strategic plans, in 3-ring binders as evidence of said flexibility. And I find it ironic that even their own book, The Rational Manager, was later revised and retitled The New Rational Manager. So even their flexible plans were changing. And the idea is not to make your plans more flexible, but the idea is to make your people more flexible, right? So what you want to do is give them what we would call adaptive direction. So not detailed step-by-step plans, because when everything is changing and your plans are changing too, that's just mayhem, right? Yeah. So what you want is some clear direction where things don't change as much. And it's very uncomfortable for some marketing managers to give direction without a lot of detail.
Right. Talking on this special episode of Sales Pipeline Radio with John Arnold, Principal Analyst at Forrester. John, you spend a lot of time talking to B2B CMOs as well. And your topic this week is around how marketing, sales, and product leaders together are activating this strategy. What advice do you give a CMO to either lead that discussion or to sort of collaborate with their peers in a level manner, sort of a peer-to-peer manner to make that happen?
Yeah, a lot of what we talk about is something that we call internally at Forrester habitats. So if you're a CMO, you kind of have a habitat, right? Mm-hmm. Your habitat is either very sales-driven or product-driven or engineering-driven, or there's a lot of politics or not very many politics, or marketing is seen as a cost center, or they're seen as a growth driver, or maybe you were brought into the organization to change something, or maybe you weren't. So you kind of have to assess things according to your habitat at first, because the last thing you want to do as a marketer, as a CMO, is come into an organization and just assume that you can change everything and, come in guns blazing, so to speak, and, fire off a bunch of changes. And that's a good way to get fired. So you have to assess and then figure out the purpose of marketing. So everybody talks about the 4 Ps. B2B marketers never owned any of the 4 Ps, right? Maybe promotion. Mm-hmm. And B2B is just very different. So I give marketers a new P. It's purpose. And marketing's purpose has a lot of different permutations. And one of them is supporting sales, right? Or supporting the organization. And that's kind of a trigger word for B2B CMOs. You just say you're supporting the organization. Well, wait a second. Actually, that can be one of the purposes of marketing, but it shouldn't be the purpose of marketing.
Right.
There's 3 other ones, by the way, in that purpose model. So,
well, and I think a lot of times you have to bring up the 4 Ps, a lot of marketers today feel like they own promotion and very little else, right?
Yeah. And the data backs that up too. Actually, we asked specifically if B2B CMOs, if they or sales have more or less influence on those 4 Ps. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that most B2B CMOs believe that sales has more influence on price, promotion, or not promotion. Promotion is the only one that marketers say they have more influence than sales over promotions. But the rest of them, sales has more influence than marketing does.
So there's a difference between influence and ownership. Who should own those Ps?
Yeah, well, the product team. Product as a discipline is sort of a relatively new concept, right? Yeah. So product management, product marketing, taking some of those Ps. But I would argue that B2B never had the 4 Ps. B2B marketing was never about product or placement or price, really. Yeah. It was sort of sales support. That's kind of where it came in.
Yeah. We've been talking for over 8 minutes and haven't mentioned AI at all, which may be a record. It might be a record in modern conversations.
You mean AIDA, ADA, like the awareness, interest, desire, action, or marketing funnel from 1898?
Maybe, or someone told me AI stands for average information, right? Which is also you can go down a rabbit hole on that as well. I don't want to talk about AI, but I want to talk about data, right? Because I think that data and how you manage and leverage and activate data is becoming more and more important for how these teams work together. And I think especially as you think about the integration across those go-to-market teams, including product, the data should not only help define and prioritize what your strategy is going to be, but you should be acting on that data as well. What kind of advice are you giving go-to-market leaders on the data side?
Yeah, so customer is the place to point that data because marketers have a lot of internal data. A lot of that data is not trusted. There's not a belief that data is accurate, and it may be inaccurate, but it's really about the customer. That's the best data. And last time I checked this fact, so I may have a more updated figure, but 71% of C-level executives put aside their opinions when they're faced with customer data that contradicts them.
Wow.
So, if you want to make decisions in the organization, bring customer data to the equation. And if the customer says it, then it's true.
When you talk to leaders about working together, and I'm thinking not just about leading marketing teams, but sort of that team of team concepts, right? Thinking of your leadership team, like your head of marketing, head of sales, head of product as your team one. What advice do you give people on just the relationship building, the rapport building, the trust building that often becomes foundational to having those hard conversations about choosing the right strategy.
Yeah, I think B2B organizations are a wide variety of different levels of sophistication and complication and complexity and matrices and all of those things. So it's hard to know exactly if there's one piece of advice for every organization because, some CMOs sit over a whole bunch of different marketing motions and sales motions, and they've got an e-commerce motion, they've got an SMB motion, they've got an enterprise motion, they have this business, this country, that country. Some of these organizations that I work with are as big as a country. So, it's like, what are you going to do to bring it all together? Well, you got to operate in different pockets of the organization. So some CMOs have really great relationships with some parts of their sales organization and not with others. And they're working on some of those where they don't have those relationships, or they have to just prioritize, and go after the places where they feel marketing can have the biggest impact. Otherwise, they spread themselves way too thin and they can't get everything done. Back to strategy is what you're going to do and what you're not going to do.
So you joined Forrester right before the pandemic. I think it was like early 2020. And so you've been here, from before and after. It seems like we're back to going in person, right? I mean, they got a lot of people here at the summit this week. I think a lot of people that maybe are working more remotely than ever. But how do you describe the benefit of being here? How do you describe the benefit of getting out of wherever you are day to day and actually prioritizing getting for a few days to B2B Summit?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, right? You got to get out of your business and think about it differently and talk to other people who are experiencing the same challenges that you are and have a lot of different perspectives, because information and facts and those kind of things are easy to come by these days, right? You can ask your AI agent, whichever one you want, to answer a question. So knowledge is easy, but it's really hard to get experience and wisdom, so go around and talk to some people who have been where you've been or are struggling with the same things. And then you've got Forrester on your side and by your side. We're creating research around this so you can look at these frameworks and models and examples and case studies. And, it all comes to life. And you say, there's a company that's done this before. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Or there's a company that's struggling with this. I'm struggling with this too, but I don't feel like I'm behind.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, like a lot of keynotes and presentations, like you can technically watch those on YouTube, but getting here with your peers and meeting other people that are facing this problem, and whether you see them in the sessions or whether you see them in the lunch line or walking around the marketplaces, we see a bunch of people streaming in from sessions right now. I mean, that is priceless, and you just can't replicate that. I just fundamentally don't think you can replicate that in a virtual format. Like in a virtual format, we do an episode like this and we hang up and we move on to another thing. Hang up here and you still have small talk. You still build relationships with each other. And I still think that's critical.
And I think this is maybe my 5th summit with Forrester. And one of my favorite things is to see people year after year. And, the people that need it the least are usually the ones that are in the sessions. It's like, well, why are you here? You're a really smart marketer and you're really good. Why are you in this session? Why? Because I'm sharpening the sword and I'm making it better and I'm meeting my colleagues. And my favorite thing is, of course, when I hear people getting promoted or they have more responsibility and all of a sudden their budgets are bigger, they're thriving, their career is growing. And year after year, they're getting better. And that's why they keep coming back.
Well, and the game's always changing, right? If you came to this thing 12 years ago and thought the waterfall was awesome, it is. But like, there's a lot of new stuff since then. This conference is not going anywhere. Let's assume we're here 2 years from now. What do you think we're focused on? What do you think some of the themes of the conversation, the research will look like in 2 years?
Well, the big new announcement this year is buying networks. And buying networks is a new concept. There's some companies that are dabbling with it. They don't have full strategies around buying networks yet. And it's going to be a huge challenge for B2B to solve some of the problems that go along with that. Like marketing doesn't have a business case for spending money on an audience that doesn't become a contact for sales. So what are we going to do with all these buying network members who we need to influence? And how is marketing going to justify that spend? So there's some problems to solve, but I think we'll still be talking about buying networks in a couple of years, but we'll have a lot more solutions around that. And the people who are here at this conference are going to be the first movers on that, and they're going to have an advantage, and they're going to have some more mature practices around that.
Yeah, no doubt. I loved what you guys talked about this morning, not just on buying committees internally, but the ecosystem. People inside and outside of the organization that are increasingly going to be critical to getting those deals. And the noise is only going to increase, right? The noise out there of people talking to your customers, the noise inside and outside the organization, creating some consensus and some consistency of that story across different people in that entire buyer ecosystem is going to be more and more important.
And marketing is going to be even more important than ever in B2B organizations.
Awesome. John Arnold, Principal Analyst at Forrester, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing. Good luck this week.
Thanks, Matt. Good to see you in person.
You too.